I still remember the taste of the dust. That's what sticks with me the most from Afghanistan. This fine, powdery dust that got into everything. Your food, your weapons, your lungs. It was like the country itself was trying to become a part of you. I'd wake up in the morning and could feel it in the corners of my eyes, taste it on my teeth before I even had a chance to brush them. My name is Staff Sergeant James Cooper. I served with the 10th Mountain Division, 2nd Battalion, 87th Infantry Regiment during Operation Enduring Freedom. This was my third deployment, my second to Afghanistan. I'd been in the Army for almost 9 years by that point. I was what they call a lifer, someone who found their purpose in uniform. The Army was my home. My brothers in arms were my family, and I couldn't imagine doing anything else with my life. Before I tell you what happened to me in the Korangal Valley in 2011, I need you to understand something. I'm not a particularly religious man. I was raised Methodist, went to church on Sundays and all that, but by the time I joined the Army at 19, I'd pretty much left all that behind. I wasn't an atheist or anything, just indifferent, I guess. God was something other people believed in, and that was fine for them. But I found my meaning in more tangible things. Serving my country, looking out for my guys, doing my job. When people ask me to explain what happened, I tell them it's like trying to describe colors to someone who's been blind their whole life. The words exist, but they don't quite capture it. But I'm going to try, because what I experienced, what I saw and felt when I died, it changed everything. And I think maybe it's important that people hear it. Our fire base was nestled in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, about 20 clicks from the Pakistan border. It wasn't much. Some HESCO barriers, sandbags, a few plywood buildings, concertina wire, but it was home. We'd been there for about 4 months, running patrols, meeting with local elders, trying to keep the Taliban from using the area as a staging ground for attacks. The morning it happened started like any other. I woke up at 0500, did some PT with my squad, ate breakfast, powdered eggs and bacon that was somehow both undercooked and burned, and got my gear ready for patrol. We were heading out to a village about 5 miles away, just a routine presence patrol. The intel guys said it was quiet, nothing to worry about. My squad consisted of 10 men, including myself. There was Martinez, my squad leader, Puerto Rican kid from the Bronx with 3 kids back home, and pictures of them plastered all over his bunk. Thompson, our medic, was this lanky guy from Minnesota who could patch you up while telling the worst jokes you've ever heard. Rodriguez was my saw gunner, built like a tank but gentle as a lamb when he wasn't behind that weapon. Williams was fresh out of basic, still had that eager look that hadn't been beaten out of him yet by the realities of deployment. Then there was Jackson, my best friend since Ranger School. We'd been through hell and back together, knew each other's families, had plans to start a security company together when we both got out. His wife was expecting their first child, a girl. He carried the ultrasound picture in his helmet. I remember checking everyone's gear before we headed out. It was second nature by then. Making sure magazines were loaded properly, comms were working, first aid kits were complete. The small rituals that might keep you alive. All right, listen up, I said during our pre-patrol briefing. Nothing fancy today. We're going to Kalatak village, meeting with Elder Nasir, then coming straight back. Keep your intervals, watch the ridge lines, and stay frosty. Any questions? There weren't any. We'd done this dozens of times before. We left the wire at 0730. The morning was cool, but I knew it would heat up fast once the sun climbed higher. The mountains around us were beautiful in their stark, rugged way. Layers of brown and gray rising up to meet a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at it. Afghanistan could be breathtaking when it wasn't trying to kill you. The first hour of the patrol was uneventful. We moved along the valley floor, following a worn dirt path that wound between fields of wheat and poppies. The farmers were already out, working with tools that hadn't changed in centuries. Some waved. Others just watched us pass, their faces unreadable. I was on point, setting the pace, scanning for anything out of place. A freshly dug patch of earth that might hide an IED, a glint of sunlight off metal in the hills. Unusual patterns of movement in the villages we passed. Your senses get heightened after a while in country. You develop what some guys call a sixth sense. This feeling in your gut when something's not right. And about 2 hours into our patrol, as we approached a narrow pass between 2 hillsides, my gut started screaming at me. "Hold up," I said over the radio, raising my fist to signal a halt. The squad stopped, taking a knee and facing outward, weapons at the ready. "What is it, Coop?" Jackson asked, moving up beside me. I scanned the hillsides, the rocky outcroppings, the sparse vegetation. Not sure. Something doesn't feel right. Jackson nodded. He'd learned to trust my instincts just as I trusted his. Want to call it in? I keyed my radio. Base camp, this is Bravo 2. We're about 2 clicks east of the village, approaching the pass. Something feels off. Any activity on the ISR feed? Negative, Bravo 2, came the reply. Drone shows normal patterns of movement in your area. No heat signatures on the ridgelines. I acknowledged, but the feeling wouldn't go away. We're going to hold position for a few minutes. Keep eyes on. We'll advise. I signaled for the squad to take up defensive positions while I pulled out my binoculars and carefully studied the terrain ahead. The pass was about 50 meters wide with steep hills on either side. A perfect spot for an ambush, but I couldn't see anything unusual. After about 10 minutes of watching and waiting, I started to think maybe I was being overcautious. Maybe the stress of the deployment, the constant vigilance, was making me jumpy. All right, I finally said. We're moving forward, but tight formation. Martinez, take the right flank. Jackson, stay on my 6. Rodriguez, keep that SAW ready. Williams and Thompson, watch our backs. We moved forward slowly, every sense on high alert. The sun was higher now, beating down on our helmets and body armor. Sweat trickled down my back and stung my eyes. We were halfway through the pass when I heard it, the faintest metallic click that made my blood run cold. Contact! I shouted, diving to the ground as the world erupted around us. The first RPG hit about 10 meters to our right, sending dirt and rocks showering over us. Then came the gunfire, the distinctive rattling cough of AK-47s pouring down from multiple positions on both hillsides. Return fire! Return fire! I yelled, shouldering my M4 and sending a burst toward a muzzle flash I spotted on the left ridge. Martinez, get the 203 up! Jackson, call it in! My training took over, muscle memory guiding my actions while my mind raced. We were in a kill zone, caught in a well-planned ambush. I could hear my guys returning fire, the heavier sound of Rodriguez's saw cutting through the cacophony. Base camp, this is Bravo 2. Jackson was shouting into his radio. We are taking heavy fire from both sides of the pass. Grid Charlie Echo, 456789. Multiple shooters, RPGs. Request immediate support. I rolled to my right, taking cover behind a small outcropping of rock. Williams. Get over here. The young private scrambled over, staying low. Take up position here and put suppressing fire on that ridge. Short, controlled bursts. Don't waste ammo. Another RPG screamed in, closer this time, the explosion sending a shower of dirt and stone fragments over us. I felt something hot slash across my cheek, shrapnel or a rock, I couldn't tell. They got us pinned down, Sarge. Rodriguez called out, his saw hammering away in bursts. Keep their heads down, I shouted back. Air support is on the way. At least I hoped it was. In that kind of terrain, with the mountains blocking comms, it was hard to know if our call had gotten through. I spotted movement on the ridge to our left. 3 figures darting between rocks, trying to flank us. I took aim and fired a 3-round burst. One fell. The others disappeared behind cover. Thompson, how's Martinez? I called to our medic, who was hunched over our squad leader. He's hit, but stable. Thompson called back. Round went through his shoulder. Another barrage of gunfire rained down on us. I heard Williams cry out beside me, clutching his arm where a bullet had grazed him. You good? I asked, not taking my eyes off the ridgeline. Yeah, he gritted out. Just a scratch. The firefight had been going on for maybe 5 minutes, though it felt like hours. My ears were ringing from the constant gunfire, my throat raw from shouting commands. I could taste blood and dust in my mouth. I worked my way over to Jackson, who was calling in updates on our situation while returning fire. What's the word? I asked, reloading my rifle. Apaches are 15 minutes out. He replied, QRF is mobilizing. 15 minutes might as well have been 15 hours. We needed to change our position or we'd be overrun. We need to fall back to those rocks about 30 meters behind us. I said, pointing to a more defensible position. Give me covering fire. I'll move first with Williams and Thompson. Martinez needs to be carried. Jackson nodded. On your go. I gave the orders, and on my signal, Rodriguez, Jackson, and the others opened up with everything they had. Under the cover of that wall of lead, I helped Thompson drag Martinez while Williams provided close security. We'd made it about halfway to our new position when I heard Jackson shout, RPG! RPG! I turned just in time to see the rocket-propelled grenade arcing through the air, aimed directly at the position I just left. But Jackson was still there, still firing to cover our movement. "Jackson!" I screamed. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the RPG impact just a few meters from where Jackson was positioned. The explosion lifted him off the ground and threw him like a rag doll. I don't remember dropping Martinez or running back toward the blast. I just remember the ringing in my ears, the taste of dirt and copper in my mouth, and Jackson's body, broken and still. I reached him and immediately saw it was bad. Shrapnel had torn through his body armor. Blood was pooling beneath him, and his eyes had that unfocused look that every soldier dreads seeing. "Medic! Medic-y!" I screamed, applying pressure to the worst of the wounds. "Hang on, Jackson. Hang on, buddy." Thompson arrived seconds later, his med kit already open. "Get back to cover, Sarge." "I got him!" But I couldn't move. This was Jackson, my friend, the guy who'd stood up at my wedding, who'd held my head over a toilet after we drunk too much in Ranger School, who had a baby girl on the way that would never know her father. "Sarge, you need to move." Thompson was shouting at me, but his voice seemed far away. The gunfire was intensifying. They knew we were vulnerable. I should have been giving orders, directing fire, getting my men to safety. But all I could see was Jackson's blood on my hands. That's when I felt the impact, like being hit with a sledgehammer. Something punched into my chest just below my right collarbone. The force of it spun me around and knocked me to the ground. Strangely, it didn't hurt at first. Just pressure and a spreading warmth. I looked down and saw the dark stain spreading across my uniform. "Oh," I thought with an odd detachment, "I've been shot." The pain came a moment later, searing and electric. I tried to call out, but all that came out was a wet cough. I tasted more blood, my own this time. Thompson was yelling something, his hands now pressing on my chest instead of Jackson's. I wanted to tell him to go back to Jackson, that Jackson needed him more, but I couldn't form the words. The sky above was so blue, impossibly blue. I'd never really noticed before how beautiful it was. The gunfire seemed quieter now, more distant. I could hear Thompson shouting, could feel him working on me, but it all seemed less important somehow. My thoughts turned to my wife, Sarah. I pictured her face, her smile. We'd argued before I deployed. Something stupid about bills or the car. I couldn't even remember what it was about, but I remembered how we'd left it unresolved. I hadn't even kissed her goodbye at the airport. That seemed important now, vitally important, but I couldn't understand why. I was cold suddenly, despite the Afghan sun beating down. The cold started in my fingertips and toes and worked its way inward. I wanted to tell Thompson I was cold, but my mouth wouldn't work right. My vision started to narrow, darkness creeping in from the edges like a vignette effect on a photograph. I could still see Thompson's face above me, his features contorted with effort and fear, his mouth moving, but I couldn't hear him anymore. The last thing I remember thinking was, I don't want to die here. Not in this dust, in this place so far from home. And then the darkness took me. What happened next is the part I struggle to describe. The part that sounds crazy, that makes people look at me with that mixture of pity and disbelief. But it's also the part that matters most. I was floating. That's the only word for it. Suddenly, I was looking down at my own body, at Thompson frantically working on my chest, at Rodriguez providing covering fire, at Williams dragging Jackson's lifeless form toward the rocks. I felt no pain, no fear, nothing but a profound sense of calm and curiosity. It was like watching a movie of my own life, but one where I no longer had a part to play. I remember thinking how strange it was to see my own face, pale and blood-streaked. My eyes were open, staring sightlessly at the sky. I watched as Thompson performed CPR, saw him jam a needle into my chest, a decompression needle for a tension pneumothorax, I realized with detached interest. Is this death? I wondered, but there was no one to answer. I felt a tug then, gentle but insistent, pulling me upward. I rose higher, the battlefield growing smaller below me. I could see the entire valley now. The mountains, the fire base in the distance. It was beautiful and terrible all at once. This place where men fought and died for reasons that suddenly seemed so insignificant. The tug came again, stronger this time. I turned, though I had no body to turn with, and saw a light. Not like sunlight or electric light, but something purer, more fundamental. It wasn't just brightness. It was as if light itself was being created, originating from a point that grew larger as I watched. And then came the rush. The best way I can describe it is like being caught in a river current. But instead of water, it was made of light and memory and emotion. I was pulled into it, through it, becoming part of it. My whole life flashed before me. That phrase is such a cliche that it's lost all meaning, but that's exactly what happened. Except it wasn't a flash. It was everything, all at once from every angle. I saw myself as a baby, taking my first steps. I felt my mother's pride, my father's steadying hands. I saw myself on my first day of school, terrified and excited. I relived my first kiss, my first heartbreak, the day I enlisted, my wedding day. But I didn't just see these moments. I experienced them again, feeling every emotion, every sensation. And I wasn't alone in these memories. Somehow I could feel the emotions of everyone involved. I felt my wife's love on our wedding day, but also her fear of losing me to war. I felt my drill sergeant's frustration when I couldn't get a maneuver right, but also his determination to make me better, to keep me alive. Most strangely, I experienced moments from perspectives other than my own. I saw myself through my father's eyes as he taught me to throw a baseball, felt his fierce love and his worry that he wasn't a good enough dad. I saw myself through my wife's eyes on the day I deployed, felt her heart breaking as she maintained a brave face. And I saw the moments when I'd hurt people, not just physically but emotionally. I felt the pain I'd caused my high school girlfriend when I broke up with her by text. I felt my mother's anguish when I told her I was enlisting, knowing she might lose me to war. I felt the fear of a young Afghan boy when our patrol entered his village, weapons ready. It wasn't judgmental. There was no sense of punishment or reward. It was simply truth, unfiltered and absolute. This is who you were. This is what you did. This is how it felt to others. The experience was overwhelming, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. I was everywhere and everywhen, experiencing my entire life simultaneously, from every possible angle. All sense of time disappeared. I could have been in that state for seconds or centuries. It made no difference. And then gradually the rush of memories began to slow. The light around me, which had been chaotic and fragmented during the life review, began to coalesce, to take on a more defined shape. It formed a tunnel of sorts, stretching ahead of me toward a brightness that was somehow both infinitely distant and right in front of me. I moved toward it, or it moved toward me. It was impossible to tell which. As I drew closer, I began to sense presences within the light. Not distinct figures, nothing so concrete, but consciousness, awareness. Many minds, many souls, all connected, all part of the same whole. I felt an overwhelming sense of homecoming, of rightness. This was where I belonged. This was where everyone belonged eventually. The pain and fear and confusion of life fell away, revealed as temporary, as necessary but transient experiences on the path to this unity. I was at the threshold now, about to cross over into that light to join with those waiting presences. And I wanted to, God, how I wanted to. The peace, the love, the understanding that emanated from that light was irresistible. Everything that had ever mattered to me, honor, duty, country, even family, seemed small and distant compared to what awaited me. But as I was about to cross over, something held me back. Not a physical barrier, but a gentle restraint, like hands placed on my shoulders. And then came a voice, not heard with ears I no longer had, but felt, understood on a level beyond sound. Not yet, it said. There is more for you to do. I wanted to argue, to beg. Let me stay, I pleaded without words. Let me be part of this light. And then the voice, or voices, for it seemed both singular and plural, spoke again, with infinite compassion but absolute certainty. You must return. You have a message to carry. Before I could ask what message, what purpose could possibly be important enough to leave this piece, I felt myself being pulled backward. The light receded, the presences faded, and I was rushing back faster and faster through darkness and cold. The impact when I returned to my body was like hitting concrete after falling from a great height. Pain exploded through me, replacing the boundless peace I'd known moments before. I heard myself gasp, heard a shout, "He's back! He's breathing!" And then the world went black again. The next few days came in flashes, fragments of consciousness between periods of darkness. I remember the medevac helicopter, the thunderous beat of its rotors, the medic's face above me, mouthing words I couldn't hear. I remember the field hospital, bright lights and urgent voices, BP's dropping again. Push another unit. We're losing him. I remember waking up in Germany, tubes in my throat, in my arms, in my chest. A doctor leaning over me, checking my pupils. Can you hear me, Sergeant Cooper? Blink if you can hear me. I remember the long flight back to Walter Reed, drugged and confused, drifting in and out of consciousness, unsure what was real and what was dream. And through it all, I held on to fragments of what I'd experienced in that light. It was slipping away, like trying to hold water in cupped hands, but I clung to the core of it. The connectedness, the love, the message I was supposed to deliver, though I still didn't understand what it was. When I finally came fully awake, truly aware for the first time, I was in a hospital room at Walter Reed. The light coming through the window told me it was morning or evening. A gentle golden light. There was a TV mounted on the wall, muted, showing a news program. A bouquet of flowers sat on the bedside table, alongside various medical equipment. And Sarah was there, asleep in the chair beside my bed, her hand resting near mine on the sheets. She looked exhausted, her face pale, dark circles under her eyes, but she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw from the intubation tube they'd removed. All that came out was a dry rasp. Sarah's eyes flew open at the sound. For a moment, she just stared at me, as if not quite believing what she was seeing. Then tears filled her eyes. "James," she whispered, rising from the chair and moving closer, taking my hand in hers. "Oh my God, James." I tried again to speak. "Water!" I managed to croak. She quickly poured a cup from the pitcher by my bed, added a straw, and held it to my lips. The cool liquid was the most delicious thing I'd ever tasted. After a few sips, I tried again. "How long?" 11 days, she said, still holding my hand as if afraid I might disappear. "You've been in and out of consciousness for 11 days. They weren't sure." Her voice broke. "They weren't sure you were going to wake up properly. There was some concern about brain damage from the oxygen deprivation." I processed this slowly, my thoughts still muddled. "The others? My squad?" Sarah's expression tightened. She'd been an army wife long enough to know the importance of this question. "Martinez is okay. He's already been released. Williams too. Rodriguez is still here, but he's stable. Thompson ... She hesitated. "Thompson didn't make it, James. He was trying to get you to cover when he was hit." Each name was a weight on my chest, heavier than the bullet that had nearly killed me. "Thompson, our medic, the guy with the terrible jokes who'd saved so many lives." "And Jackson?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I'd seen his body, had watched from above as Williams dragged him to cover. Sarah shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, James. He was gone before the medevac arrived." I closed my eyes, letting the grief wash over me. "Jackson, my friend. He'd never meet his daughter now. What was her name? Had they even decided on one before he deployed?" "His baby?" I asked, opening my eyes again. "She was born 3 days ago," Sarah said softly. "Melissa. They named her Melissa. Lisa called me from the hospital. Melissa, Jackson's daughter, born into a world where her father already waited on the other side. In that light, I'd almost entered. "I need to tell her," I said, trying to sit up despite the pain that flared in my chest. "Lisa, I need to tell her about Jackson." Sarah gently pressed me back. "James, you need to rest. You've been through so much. Lisa will be here tomorrow. She wants to see you, to hear what happened." What happened? How could I possibly explain what happened? I died. I'd seen the other side. I'd experienced my entire life from every perspective. I'd been given a message to deliver, though I still didn't understand what it was. Would they believe me? Would anyone? Or would they write it off as hallucinations, the product of a brain starved of oxygen and flooded with stress hormones and pain medications? "I died, Sarah," I whispered, looking into her eyes, needing her to understand. "I actually died out there." She squeezed my hand. "I know, honey. The doctors told me. Your heart stopped for almost 4 minutes before they got you back." "No, you don't understand," I insisted, my voice stronger now despite the rawness. "I left my body. I saw everything. I saw my whole life. I struggled to find words for what I'd experienced. I saw what comes after." Sarah looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Concern, love, uncertainty. "James, the doctors said you might have experienced something like that. It's called a near-death experience. It's fairly common in trauma cases. It's the brain's way of..." "It wasn't just my brain," I interrupted, frustrated. This was what I was afraid of, that everyone would try to explain it away, to fit it into some comfortable scientific box. It was real, Sarah. More real than this room, than this conversation. I saw Thompson working on me. I saw Williams dragging Jackson's body. I saw details I couldn't have known if I was unconscious. Sarah was quiet for a moment, studying my face. Then she said, "Okay, I'm listening. Tell me what you saw." So I did. I told her everything, from the moment darkness took me on that dusty Afghan path to the moment I was pulled back into my broken body. I told her about the life review, about feeling others' emotions, about the light and the presences within it, about the message I was supposed to deliver. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from doubt to wonder to something like fear and back again. When I finally finished, the room was silent, except for the soft beeping of the monitors. "Do you believe me?" I finally asked. Sarah took a deep breath. "I believe that you experienced this," she said carefully. "I believe it was real to you. And I believe that something profound happened to you out there. Whether it was exactly as you described, or whether your brain was creating something to help you process a traumatic experience, I don't know. I don't think anyone can know for sure. It wasn't the unconditional acceptance I'd hoped for, but it was honest. And maybe it was all I could reasonably expect. How could anyone fully understand unless they'd experienced it themselves?" "What was the message?" Sarah asked after another moment of silence. "You said you were told you had a message to deliver." What was it?" I shook my head, frustrated. "That's just it. I don't know. It wasn't spelled out for me. Just that I had to come back, that I had more to do, a message to carry. But I don't know what it is." Sarah squeezed my hand again. "Maybe you'll figure it out as you heal. Maybe that's part of your journey now." Before I could respond, the door opened and a doctor walked in, followed by a nurse. Their faces registered surprise and then relief when they saw I was awake and talking. "Well, look who's decided to rejoin us," the doctor said, moving to check the monitors. "I'm Dr. Patel. I've been overseeing your care since you arrived at Walter Reed. How are you feeling, Sergeant Cooper?" "Like I got shot," I replied, attempting a smile. "Doctor," Patel chuckled. "Well, that's appropriate since you did. The bullet entered below your right clavicle, collapsed your lung, and nicked your subclavian artery. You lost a significant amount of blood in the field, and your heart stopped both there and again during surgery. Frankly, it's something of a miracle that you're lying here talking to us." Miracle. The word hung in the air. Was that what had happened? A miracle? Or was there some other explanation for why I'd been allowed, or forced, into return? "When can I get out of here?" I asked. The doctor raised an eyebrow. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Sergeant. You've got a long recovery ahead. The bullet did a fair amount of damage. You're looking at several months of physical therapy, possibly some additional surgeries depending on how things heal. And then there's the psychological aspect. Trauma like this often comes with its own challenges." The nurse was checking my vitals, typing notes into a tablet. "Your wife has been here every day," she said with a warm smile. "Barely left your side. You've got a good one there." I looked at Sarah, saw the exhaustion in her face, the worry lines that hadn't been there before my deployment. "Yeah," I agreed. "I do." The doctor continued his examination, explaining my injuries in more detail, discussing the treatment plan moving forward. I tried to focus, to absorb the information, but my mind kept drifting back to the light, to the peace I'd felt, to the message I was supposed to deliver. After the medical staff left, promising to return later with the neurologist who wanted to assess my cognitive function, Sarah and I were alone again. "You should go home," I told her. "Get some real sleep." "I'm okay now." She shook her head. "Not a chance. I've waited 11 days for you to wake up properly. I'm not going anywhere." I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt a swell of emotion. This woman had married a soldier knowing the risks, had supported me through deployments, had rushed to my side when I was wounded, had barely left this room for 11 days. And our last conversation before I deployed had been an argument about something neither of us could even remember now. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "For everything. For scaring you. For the fight before I left. For—" "Shh," she interrupted, pressing a finger to my lips. "None of that matters now. You're here. You're alive. That's all I care about." But it did matter. That was one of the things I'd learned in the life review. Everything mattered. Every interaction, every harsh word, every kind gesture. They all rippled outward, affecting others in ways we could never fully understand in the moment. "I love you," I said simply. "I love you too," she replied, leaning down to kiss my forehead. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands until Sarah spoke again. "So what happens now? With the Army, I mean?" It was a good question, one I hadn't had time to consider. My military career was the only adult life I'd known, but the bullet had done significant damage. Even with the best physical therapy, it was unlikely I'd regain the full function needed for combat roles. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess it depends on how well I recover. Medical board will evaluate me. Best case, I might be able to transition to a training role or something administrative. Worst case, medical discharge. The thought should have terrified me. Before Afghanistan, before the light, the idea of leaving the army would have seemed like losing my identity, my purpose. But now I wondered if there might be another purpose waiting for me. If the message I was meant to deliver required a different path. Whatever happens, Sarah said, we'll figure it out together. I nodded, grateful beyond words for her presence, her steadiness. Then a thought occurred to me. Did anyone mention anything unusual about when they found me? Anything I might have said or done? Sarah furrowed her brow. The doctors mentioned you were intermittently conscious during transport and initial treatment. You were saying things, but mostly incoherent. Why? What kind of things? I pressed. I don't know exactly. The field report just said you were delirious, talking about light and needing to tell someone something. She studied my face. Is this about your experience? Do you think you were trying to tell them about it? I nodded. I need to talk to the guys who were there, the ones who survived. They might have heard something important. James, Sarah said gently, you need to focus on recovering right now. There will be time to piece everything together later. She was right, of course, but the urgency I felt wouldn't subside. Something had happened to me out there. Something profound and life-altering. I'd been given a second chance, sent back with a purpose. I needed to understand what it was. The next few days were a blur of medical examinations, visits from superior officers, debriefings about the ambush. I told the official version, the firefight, getting shot, losing consciousness. I left out the part about leaving my body, about the light and the life review. That wasn't for military reports or medical charts. Rodriguez came to see me, still in a wheelchair himself, his right leg heavily bandaged. He'd taken shrapnel from the same RPG that killed Jackson. Good to see you vertical, Sarge, he said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. The kind of forced cheerfulness that masked deeper trauma. Likewise, I replied. How's the leg? He shrugged. Doc says I'll keep it, which is the good news. Bad news is I might not be doing any 5-mile runs anytime soon. We talked about the others. Martinez already back with the unit in Afghanistan. Williams recovering at home with his family. We avoided talking about Thompson and Jackson at first, dancing around the losses that hung heavy between us. Finally, I had to ask, what happened after I went down? The official report is pretty clinical. Rodriguez's expression darkened. It was a mess, Sarge. Thompson was working on you. Had just gotten your bleeding under control when he took one in the neck. I tried to get to him, but he gestured at his leg. Williams dragged both you and Jackson to cover. Kid's getting a Bronze Star for it. Should be a silver if you ask me. And then, I prompted, the Apaches showed up about 5 minutes later. Lit up those hillsides like the 4th of July. QRF arrived right after that, secured the area, got us loaded onto the birds. He paused. You were in bad shape, Sarge. The medic on the bird had to restart your heart twice. Didn't think you were going to make it. I nodded slowly, processing this. Did I say anything? When they were working on me or on the helicopter, Rodriguez gave me an odd look. You weren't exactly in a talking mood, what with being mostly dead and all. But later, I pressed. During transport or at the field hospital. Did I say anything then? He hesitated. You were in and out. Delirious. Said some weird stuff. What kind of weird stuff? Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in his wheelchair. I don't know, man. You were talking about light, about seeing everyone's lives. About how we're all connected or something. The doc said it was just the brain doing strange things because of the trauma and the drugs. So I had tried to tell them. Even in my confused, half-conscious state, I tried to communicate what I'd experienced. Do you believe in God, Rodriguez? I asked suddenly. He blinked, surprised by the change in direction. Sure, I guess. My abuela would have my hide if I didn't. Why? What about an afterlife? Heaven, hell, all that? Rodriguez looked increasingly uncomfortable. Sarge, did you hit your head too? What's with the philosophical questions? I sighed. Something happened to me out there, Rodriguez. When I died, I saw things, experienced things that have changed me. He was quiet for a moment, studying my face. Like a near-death experience? Bright light, tunnel, all that stuff? Something like that, I said. But more, much more. Rodriguez nodded slowly. My cousin Hector, he drowned when we were kids. They brought him back, but he was gone for almost 3 minutes. He talked about seeing angels, about floating above his body. My family believed him. Others didn't. He shrugged. Who's to say what's real on the other side, you know? It wasn't quite understanding, but it wasn't dismissal either. It was the most I could hope for, maybe. Thanks for coming by, I said, feeling suddenly tired. The conversations, the examinations, the constant effort to appear normal while processing what had happened, it was all taking a toll. No problem, Sarge, Rodriguez said, wheeling himself toward the door. Just focus on getting better, all right? We need you back out there. But even as he said it, we both knew it wasn't true. I wouldn't be going back out there. My war was over. The question was, what battle was I supposed to fight now? The following day brought the visit I'd been both anticipating and dreading. Lisa Jackson, my best friend's widow, came to see me carrying her newborn daughter. Sarah had warned me she was coming, had tried to prepare me, but nothing could have readied me for the sight of her. Pale, eyes red-rimmed, but dry, holding the tiny bundle that was Melissa Jackson. Jackson's daughter, the child he would never meet. Lisa, I said, my voice breaking as she entered the room. I tried to sit up straighter, wincing at the pain in my chest. James, she replied, managing a small, sad smile. It's good to see you awake. Sarah took the baby while Lisa pulled a chair close to my bed. For a moment, we just looked at each other, neither sure how to begin. I'm so sorry, I finally said, the words woefully inadequate. He was the best of us. Lisa nodded, tears filling her eyes but not falling. She'd probably cried so much in the past 2 weeks that she had no tears left. The officers who came to tell me, they said he died saving others. That he was brave until the end. He was, I confirmed. He was providing covering fire so we could move the wounded. He never hesitated, never thought of himself first. That was Ryan. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. They told me you were with him, that you were there when it happened. And here it was, the moment of choice. I could tell her the official version, the sanitized military account of her husband's last moments. Or I could tell her the truth, that I had been shot before I could reach him, that I hadn't been with him in the physical sense when he died, but that I had seen him afterward from above. I was shot trying to get to him, I said, deciding on honesty. I didn't reach him in time, but Lisa, there's something you should know. I glanced at Sarah, who gave me an encouraging nod. She understood what I was about to share. When I was hit, when my heart stopped, I had an experience. Doctors call it a near-death experience, but it was more than that. It was real. And I saw Ryan. Lisa's breath caught. What do you mean you saw him? So I told her. Not the entire experience. She didn't need to hear about my life review or the message I was supposedly meant to deliver. But I told her about leaving my body, about seeing everything from above, about the light and the peace I'd felt. Ryan was already there. I said softly. He was at peace, Lisa. No pain, no fear. Just complete acceptance and love. Lisa was crying now, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. How can you know that? How can you be sure it wasn't just your brain creating what you needed to see? It was the same question Sarah had asked, the same doubt everyone would have. I can't prove it, I admitted. I can only tell you what I experienced. And in that moment, I was as certain of Ryan's presence in that light as I am of sitting here talking to you now. She wiped at her tears. Did he say anything? Was there a message? I hesitated. There hadn't been specific messages, not in the way she was hoping for. But I had felt Jackson's emotions, his essence, as part of that greater light. He didn't speak in words, I said carefully, but I felt what he felt. And what he felt for you and Melissa was pure love. Unbroken by death, unchanged by separation. He's still with you, Lisa. Not in the same way, but he's still there. Sarah approached with the baby, who was beginning to fuss. Lisa took her daughter, looking down at the tiny face that held echoes of Ryan. I want to believe you, she whispered. I need to believe that he's not just gone. He's not, I said with a conviction that surprised even me. None of them are. Thompson, all the others we've lost, they're part of something greater now. Something we can't fully understand from this side. Lisa looked up at me, searching my face. You really believe that? It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway, with everything I am. She nodded slowly, looking back down at her daughter. Ryan was so excited about her. Had all these plans, teaching her to fish, showing her how to throw a football. He was going to be such a good dad. He would have been, I agreed, feeling the weight of his absence anew. But she'll know him, Lisa. Through your stories, through all of us who loved him. She'll know what kind of man her father was. Lisa reached out and took my hand. Thank you, James, for telling me, for being honest about what you saw. Whether it was real or not, it helps. After Lisa left, taking tiny Melissa with her, I fell into an exhausted sleep. The emotional toll of the conversation had drained what little energy I had. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, for several hours. When I woke, the room was dark except for the glow of the monitors. Sarah was asleep in the recliner chair in the corner, covered with a thin hospital blanket. The clock on the wall showed 2:17 a.m. I lay there in the darkness, thinking about Lisa and Melissa, about Jackson and Thompson, about the message I was supposed to deliver. What could be so important that I was pulled back from that light, from that peace? What did I know now that others needed to hear? The answers didn't come. Instead, I drifted back to sleep and dreamed of Afghanistan. Not the firefight, not the death and blood and dust, but the mountains, the impossible blue of the sky, the faces of the children in the villages we'd patrolled. In the dream, the light I'd entered after death somehow suffused everything, connecting it all, binding the mountains to the sky, to the children to me, in a web of belonging and meaning. I woke with tears on my cheeks and the fading impression that I'd almost understood something vital, something that lay just beyond the reach of waking consciousness. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Physical therapy sessions that left me sweating and exhausted, consultations with specialists, visits from fellow soldiers and officers. The regiment's chaplain came by, and I found myself telling him about my experience, testing his reaction. Many warriors throughout history have reported similar experiences, he said thoughtfully after listening without interruption. Across cultures, across religions, there seems to be something universal about it. Do you believe it's real? I asked. Or just the brain's way of coping with trauma? The chaplain smiled. Why does it have to be one or the other? Perhaps God works through the brain's mechanisms. Perhaps what you experienced was both neurological and spiritual, the brain's translation of something beyond its full comprehension. It was a diplomatic answer, but not a dismissive one. I appreciated that. What about the message? I asked. I was told I had to come back, that I had a message to deliver. But I don't know what it is. The chaplain considered this. Perhaps you're not meant to deliver a specific sentence or paragraph. Perhaps the message is your experience itself, what you learned about life, death, connection. Perhaps you're meant to live differently based on what you saw, and that living becomes the message. It was an interesting perspective, one I hadn't considered. Could my whole life be the message? Was I supposed to somehow embody what I'd learned on the other side? 2 weeks after I regained consciousness, the medical board convened to evaluate my condition and future with the Army. The verdict was what I'd expected. My injuries were too severe for a return to combat duty. I could either accept a medical discharge with benefits or transition to a non-combat role, possibly in training or administration. I surprised myself by requesting time to consider the options. Before Afghanistan, before the light, there would have been no question. I would have fought to stay in, to get back to my unit in whatever capacity they'd allow. But now I found myself wondering if my path lay elsewhere. That night, Sarah and I talked it through. What are you thinking? She asked as we sat in the hospital courtyard, enjoying the fresh air and privacy after weeks of constant medical supervision. I'm thinking that maybe the Army isn't where I'm meant to be anymore, I said slowly. Maybe whatever message I'm supposed to deliver can't be delivered from inside the military. Sarah studied my face. This is really important to you, isn't it? This message? I nodded. It's the only reason I'm here, Sarah. I was ready to go into that light. I wanted to, but someone sent me back, said I had more to do. How can I ignore that? So what will you do instead? If you take the discharge? It was the question I'd been asking myself. What could I possibly do that would fulfill this purpose I'd been given? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I do know I need to talk about what happened to me. Not just to you or Lisa or a few friends, but more broadly. People need to know that death isn't the end, that we're all connected in ways we can't see from this side. Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking. You could write about it, she suggested, or speak about it. There are organizations that study these experiences, that bring together people who've had them. Maybe, I said, not entirely convinced. But would anyone listen? Would anyone believe me? Some would, she said. Some wouldn't. But if even one person found comfort or meaning in your story, like Lisa did, wouldn't that be worth it? She had a point. If my experience could bring comfort to others who were grieving, if it could ease the fear of death that haunted so many, wasn't that a message worth delivering? The next day, I informed the medical board of my decision. I would accept the medical discharge, the benefits, the end of my military career. It was both terrifying and liberating, stepping away from the only identity I'd known as an adult, but also stepping towards something new, something that felt increasingly important. As my discharge date approached, I began researching near-death experiences more systematically. I was amazed to discover how common they were. Millions of people claim to have had them across cultures, religions, and time periods. Many of the elements were strikingly similar to what I'd experienced. The out-of-body sensation, the life review, the encounter with light and love. I found online forums where NDE experiencers shared their stories, books written by doctors and scientists who had studied the phenomenon, organizations dedicated to research and support. I wasn't alone, far from it. And yet my experience felt unique in certain ways. The clarity of it, the sense of purpose I'd brought back, the message I was still trying to understand. 3 months after the firefight in Afghanistan, I was officially discharged from the United States Army. I stood tall as they presented me with my medals, a Purple Heart for my wounds, a Bronze Star for my actions before I was hit. I thought of Jackson, of Thompson, of all those who wouldn't be going home except in flag-draped coffins, and the medals seemed small, inadequate tokens. After the ceremony, my commanding officer pulled me aside. "What's next for you, Cooper?" I hesitated, still not entirely sure myself. "I'm going to tell my story, sir. What happened to me over there? Not just the firefight, but what came after. I think it might help people." He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "You know, most people won't believe you. They'll say it was the trauma, the blood loss, the medications." "I know," I acknowledged, "but some will listen. Some need to hear it." He nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, Cooper, I believe you. I've seen too much in my years of service to discount the possibility of something more, something beyond what we can see and touch." His words surprised me, gave me a boost of confidence I hadn't realized I needed. "Thank you, sir." As we left the base, Sarah driving while I sat in the passenger seat, still uncomfortable with my healing wounds, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Grief for what I'd lost, for the brothers who wouldn't be coming home, but also a growing sense of purpose, of direction. "Where to?" Sarah asked as we approached the highway. It was a bigger question than she probably realized. Where was I going now? What path would lead me to fulfill whatever purpose I'd been sent back for? "Home," I said simply. For now, just home. But even as I said it, I knew this was just the beginning of a new journey, one that would take me far from the battlefields of Afghanistan, but perhaps into battles of a different kind. The battle to be believed. The battle to make meaning from loss. The battle to deliver a message I was still struggling to fully understand. As we drove away from the military base that had been my home for so many years, I found myself thinking of the light again, of the peace and love I'd experienced there. And I made a silent promise to Jackson, to Thompson, to all those who remained in that light while I was sent back, that I would not waste this second chance. I would find my message and I would deliver it, whatever it took. The road ahead was uncertain, my mission unclear. But I was a soldier still in my own way. And soldiers complete their missions, no matter the cost. Home turned out to be a small apartment in Virginia that Sarah had rented while I was deployed. It was temporary. We'd always planned to buy a proper house once I finished my service. But now it was our launching pad for whatever came next. That first week as a civilian was disorienting. For nearly a decade, my life had been structured around orders, missions, training schedules. Now I found myself adrift in unscheduled hours. No uniform to wear. No clear objective to accomplish. The physical recovery continued to be challenging. Twice weekly physical therapy sessions helped me regain strength and mobility in my right arm and shoulder, but progress was slow and painful. The doctors had warned me I might never regain full range of motion, might always carry a certain stiffness, a reminder of that day in the dust. But the physical challenges paled in comparison to the psychological ones. At night, I'd jolt awake, heart pounding, the sounds of gunfire and explosions ringing in my ears. I'd find myself back in that pass, watching Jackson die, feeling the impact of the bullet tearing through my chest. And then there were the other dreams, the ones about the light. These were different, not nightmares, but reminders. In these dreams, I'd find myself surrounded by that pure, loving radiance again, feeling that sense of homecoming, of rightness. And I'd hear that voice, "You have a message to carry." I'd wake from these dreams with tears on my face and an almost physical ache of loss. Not for my former life, but for that light, that unity I'd experienced so briefly. Sarah noticed, of course. She'd hold me when I woke gasping from the nightmares, listened patiently when I tried to describe the dreams of light. I feel like I'm failing, I confessed to her one night, sitting on our small balcony, looking out at the suburban darkness. Like I was given this incredible gift, this purpose, and I'm squandering it because I don't know what to do with it. You're being too hard on yourself, she said gently. It's only been a few months. You're still healing, still adjusting. The message will become clear when it's time. I wanted to believe her, but the sense of urgency was growing, not diminishing. Every day I wasn't actively pursuing my purpose felt like a day wasted. So I began to take small steps. I joined an online forum for near-death experiencers, sharing my story, reading others. I ordered books on the subject, devouring accounts from people across different backgrounds, looking for commonalities, for clues to what I was meant to do. I found both comfort and frustration in these explorations. Comfort in knowing others had traveled similar paths, had returned with the same certainty that death was not the end, that love transcended physical existence. Frustration because no one else seemed to have been given a specific mission, a message to deliver, without being told exactly what that message was. One afternoon, about 4 months after my discharge, I received a phone call from an unexpected source. Lisa Jackson, Ryan's widow, wanted to meet for coffee. I hadn't seen her since that day in the hospital, though we'd exchanged a few texts, mostly me checking in on her and Melissa. We met at a small cafe near her parents' house, where she'd been staying since Ryan's death. She looked better than the last time I'd seen her, still carrying the weight of grief, but there was color in her cheeks, a certain resolute strength in her posture as she approached, pushing Melissa's stroller. "James," she said, giving me a quick hug before sitting down. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course," I replied, my eyes drawn to the stroller where little Melissa, now almost 6 months old, was sleeping peacefully. "She's getting big," Lisa smiled, a genuine if fleeting expression. "Growing too fast. Ryan would be..." Her voice caught, and she took a moment before continuing. "Ryan would be amazed." I nodded, not knowing what to say. The absence of my friend still felt like a physical thing between us, a presence in its own right. After we ordered coffee for both of us, though I noted she'd switched to decaf, Lisa got straight to the point. "I've been thinking a lot about what you told me, about your experience, about seeing Ryan in that light." She hesitated, then continued. "At first I wanted to believe it just because it was comforting. The idea that he wasn't just gone, that he was somewhere at peace. That's understandable," I said. "But then something happened," she said, leaning forward slightly. "Something I can't explain. And I thought maybe you could help me make sense of it. I felt a flutter of something, anticipation, hope, fear in my chest." What happened?" Lisa glanced down at Melissa, then back at me. "I was having a really bad night last week. Melissa was colicky, wouldn't stop crying no matter what I did. I was exhausted, frustrated. I started crying too. And I said out loud, 'I can't do this, Ryan. I can't do this without you.'" She took a shaky breath. And then Melissa just stopped crying, instantly, and she looked at something over my shoulder. She smiled, her first real smile, at whatever she was seeing. I turned around, but there was nothing there, at least nothing I could see. I felt goosebumps rise on my arms. "You think it was Ryan?" It wasn't a question, but Lisa nodded anyway. I felt, I can't explain it exactly, like someone had put their hand on my shoulder, like someone was there, even though I couldn't see them. Her eyes met mine, searching. "Am I crazy? Is grief making me imagine things?" "No," I said with absolute certainty. "You're not crazy, Lisa. What I saw on the other side, it wasn't the end of connection. If anything, it was the beginning of understanding how deeply connected we all are, even across the barrier of death." She studied my face. "You really believe that?" "I know it," I said. "The way I know my own name, the way I know the sun will rise tomorrow. And not because of faith or hope, but because I experienced it." Lisa was quiet for a moment, processing this. "I've been talking to some other war widows," she said finally, "a support group. And when I mentioned what you told me about your experience, about seeing Ryan, several of them said they'd had moments, feelings of presence, unexplainable coincidences that felt like messages. This caught my attention." "What kind of moments?" "One woman said the lights in her house would flicker whenever she talked about her husband. Another found his dog tags in a drawer she'd already emptied and searched multiple times. A third said her 3-year-old started talking to an empty chair where her daddy used to sit. These were the kind of stories I'd been reading about online. Encounters that couldn't easily be explained away. that suggested some form of ongoing connection with those who had died. They all want to meet you, Lisa continued, to hear your story firsthand. I told them you'd actually been there, that you'd crossed over even if just for a few minutes. They have so many questions. I felt a surge of something like electricity through my body. Was this it? Was this part of the message I was meant to deliver? Reassurance to those left behind that their loved ones weren't truly gone? I'd be happy to meet with them, I said, to share what I experienced. Lisa smiled, relief evident in her expression. Thank you. I think it would mean a lot to them, to all of us. As we finished our coffee, watching Melissa wake and blink sleepily at the world around her, I felt the first real sense of direction since my discharge. Maybe I wouldn't reach millions of people with my message, but if I could bring comfort to a few war widows, a few children who would grow up without fathers, wasn't that purpose enough? The meeting with Lisa's support group was arranged for the following week, in the community room of a local church. When I arrived, I was surprised to find not the small gathering I'd expected, but nearly 30 people, mostly women, but some men as well, and several children playing quietly in a corner under the supervision of a teenager. Lisa greeted me at the door. I hope you don't mind the crowd, she said. When word got out that you were coming, people from other support groups asked to join. I swallowed hard, suddenly nervous. I'd prepared to share my experience with a few people in an intimate setting, not address a room full of strangers. But as I looked at their faces, all bearing the unmistakable marks of grief and loss, all hoping for something, anything, to ease their pain, I knew I couldn't back out. It's fine, I assured her. Just not what I was expecting. Lisa led me to the front of the room, where a circle of chairs had been arranged. I sat down, and the others quickly filled the seats around me. There was an anticipatory silence, heavy with expectation. Thank you all for coming, Lisa began. This is James Cooper. His husband Ryan was my husband's best friend. They served together in Afghanistan. She paused, gathering herself. James was with Ryan when he died. But more than that, James had an experience, a near-death experience that I think might bring some comfort to those of us left behind. She nodded to me and I took a deep breath. Where to begin? How to convey something so profound, so beyond ordinary experience, to a room full of people desperate for reassurance? First, I want to say that I'm sorry for your losses, I started. I know that nothing I say can fill the void left by the people you loved. Nothing can replace them or make the grief disappear. There were nods around the circle, a few murmured acknowledgments. What I can offer is my experience. What happened to me on a dusty road in Afghanistan when a bullet stopped my heart? I looked around the circle, making eye contact with as many as I could. I died. For nearly 4 minutes, my heart didn't beat. And in those minutes, I experienced something that changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what comes after. For the next half hour, I shared my story. The out-of-body experience, seeing my own body and my squad mates from above, the life review, the light, the overwhelming sense of love and belonging, the message to return. I spoke as plainly as I could, without embellishment or drama. The truth needed no enhancement. When I finished, the room was silent, except for a few muffled sobs. Then a woman in her 30s with red-rimmed eyes raised her hand. My husband died in Fallujah in 2007, she said. Did you see others there? In the light? Could you recognize specific people? It was the question I'd been expecting, the one I knew mattered most to them. And I had to be honest. I didn't see individual people the way we see each other here. I explained. It wasn't like a reunion where you could pick out faces in a crowd. It was more a sense of presence, of consciousness. I knew Jackson, Ryan, was there, but not because I saw him with my eyes. I felt him. I knew him. The woman nodded. Disappointment and understanding mingled in her expression. But, I continued, what I can tell you with absolute certainty is that they're not gone. Not in the way we fear most. Their consciousness, their essence, what makes them, that continues. And the connection we share with them doesn't end with death. If anything, it becomes clearer, purer, without the distractions and limitations of physical existence. Another hand went up, an older man this time, probably in his 60s. I lost my son in Iraq. 1st Armored Division. I've been angry at God, at the Army, at the whole damn world. Are you saying I should just accept it? That it's all part of some plan? I shook my head. No, sir. Your anger is valid. Your grief is valid. I'm not here to tell you how to feel or to offer easy answers. I paused, considering my words carefully. What I experienced wasn't about a plan or divine judgment. It was about connection, about love that transcends physical death. Your son is still connected to you, even if you can't see or touch him. The man's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded, seeming to take some comfort in this. More questions followed, specific, probing questions about what I'd felt, what I'd seen, what I believed it all meant. I answered as honestly as I could, admitting when I didn't know, sharing what I was certain of. Toward the end of the session, a young girl, maybe 8 or 9, who had been sitting quietly beside a woman I assumed was her mother, raised her hand. Her mother looked startled, as if she hadn't expected her daughter to speak. "Yes," I said, smiling at her. "My daddy died in a helicopter." She said simply, "Mommy says he's in heaven." "Is that where you went? To heaven?" The directness of the question, the innocence behind it, caught me off guard. I looked at her mother, who gave a small nod, permitting me to answer. I began carefully. I think what I experienced might be what people call heaven. But it wasn't a place with clouds and gates like in pictures. It was more like being held in the biggest, warmest hug you can imagine, where you know you're completely loved and completely safe. And everyone who has ever loved you and everyone you have ever loved is somehow part of that hug. The girl considered this, then smiled. "That sounds nice. I hope my daddy is there." "I believe he is," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And I believe he still loves you very much." After the meeting, several people approached me individually, sharing stories of mysterious occurrences since their loved ones' deaths, dreams that felt like visits, items moving inexplicably, moments when they felt a presence beside them. Each story reinforced what I had come to believe, that the connection between souls transcended physical death, that love was, in some profound sense, immortal. As I drove home that night, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced since before the firefight. This, sharing my experience, bringing comfort to the grieving, felt right. It felt like part of the message I was meant to deliver. But was it the entire message? I still wasn't sure. Over the next few months, word spread. What had started as a single meeting with a small support group expanded into invitations to speak at other gatherings. Veterans groups, grief counseling centers, even a few churches whose pastors were open-minded enough to consider experiences that didn't fit neatly into theological boxes. Sarah supported me in this new mission, though I could tell she worried about how immersed I was becoming in stories of death and grief. "Don't forget to live your own life," she reminded me gently one evening after I'd returned from a particularly emotional speaking engagement. "You were sent back for a reason, but that reason might include building a future here, with me." She was right, of course. I'd been so focused on understanding and delivering my message that I'd neglected other aspects of life. Our marriage, planning for our own future, finding work that could sustain us financially beyond my military benefits. With Sarah's encouragement, I enrolled in college courses, using my GI Bill benefits. I chose psychology as my major, thinking it might help me better understand not only my own experience, but also the grief and healing processes of those I was trying to help. As my studies progressed, I found myself particularly drawn to transpersonal psychology, the branch that explores spiritual and transcendent experiences, altered states of consciousness, and human potential beyond conventional understandings of the self. One of my professors, Dr. Eleanor Matthews, took a special interest in my experience and the work I was doing with grief support groups. A respected researcher in consciousness studies, she invited me to participate in a research project she was conducting on near-death experiences. "What you're describing is remarkably consistent with thousands of other accounts we've gathered," she told me during our first formal interview. "The out-of-body perception, the life review, the encounter with light and love, these elements appear across cultures, religions, and historical periods. Does that make it more real to you?" I asked. "The consistency?" "Dr. Matthew smiled. "Science doesn't deal in real or unreal so much as in patterns and explanations. What I can say is that the consistency of these reports suggests something significant is happening. Whether it's a glimpse of an afterlife or an evolutionarily preserved brain response to the dying process is still debated." "It was real," I said with quiet conviction. "More real than this conversation, than this room. I believe you experienced it as real," she said carefully. "And I'm fascinated by the sense of purpose you brought back. This feeling that you have a message to deliver. That's less common in the accounts we've studied." This caught my attention. Less common, but not unique. No, not unique. Some NDEers return with a sense of mission. Artists who never painted before suddenly feel compelled to create. Others dedicate themselves to environmental causes or humanitarian work. But the specificity of your experience, being told you have a message but not being told what it is, that's particularly intriguing. Our conversation planted a seed in my mind. If others had returned with purposes, with missions, how had they discovered what they were meant to do? Had they struggled as I was struggling, or had their paths been clearer? Doctor, Matthews invited me to a conference on consciousness studies, where I would have the opportunity to meet other near-death experiencers, including some who had returned with a similar sense of purpose. The conference was held at a university in Arizona, drawing researchers, medical professionals, and experiencers from around the world. Sarah came with me, her presence grounding me as I navigated this gathering of strangers who nonetheless felt like kindred spirits. On the second day, I participated in a panel discussion with 4 other NDE survivors. There was Michelle, a former corporate lawyer who had died during childbirth and now ran a nonprofit organization supporting mothers in developing countries. David had been a Wall Street trader before his heart attack. Now he taught mindfulness meditation to at-risk youth. Elena had been in a car accident that claimed the lives of her husband and daughter. She'd returned to become a grief counselor. And Robert, a retired firefighter who had died in a house fire, now traveled the country advocating for burn survivors. Each of them shared their stories, not just of their near-death experiences, which varied in details but contained many of the same elements I'd experienced, but of their journeys afterward, of how they discovered their purposes. I fought it at first. David admitted when the moderator asked about his transition from finance to teaching meditation. Kept telling myself it was trauma or brain chemistry or a hallucination. Went right back to trading, but I was miserable, physically ill, depressed, anxious. It wasn't until I finally listened to what my experience was telling me that I found peace again. Michelle nodded in agreement. The universe has a way of making itself heard. If you ignore the whisper, it becomes a shout. If you ignore the shout, it becomes a crisis. Better to listen early. When it was my turn to share, I spoke honestly about my struggle to understand what message I was meant to deliver, how I'd found purpose in speaking to the bereaved, but still felt there might be more. How do you know? I asked the others. How do you know when you found your true purpose, your message? Elena smiled gently. For me, it was like coming home, a sense of rightness, of this is what I'm meant to be doing. The work is still challenging, still painful sometimes, but there's an underlying certainty that I'm on the right path. Robert added, I think the message evolves too. What I was meant to do right after my NDE might not be exactly what I'm meant to do for the rest of my life. It's a journey, not a destination. Their words resonated with me. Perhaps I was putting too much pressure on myself to identify one specific message, one perfect path. Perhaps the message was unfolding naturally through the work I was already doing, through the connections I was making, through the comfort I was bringing to the grieving. After the panel, a woman approached me, late 50s perhaps, with silver-streaked dark hair and kind eyes. Sergeant Cooper, she said, extending her hand. I'm Dr. Rebecca Chen. I run a research center focused on consciousness studies, particularly near-death experiences. We shook hands. Just James now, I said. I'm not in the Army anymore. She smiled. Old habits. I was Air Force myself many years ago. She paused, then continued. I was very moved by your story, especially your commitment to helping military families processing grief. We're actually launching a new study specifically examining combat-related NDEs, and I wondered if you might be interested in participating, perhaps even taking a more active role. What kind of role? I asked, intrigued. We're looking for someone who can help us reach out to veterans who've had these experiences, someone who speaks their language, understands their context. The military culture can be insular. Many veterans don't share these experiences for fear of being seen as weak or unstable. I knew exactly what she meant. If I hadn't nearly died, if I hadn't been forced to confront what I'd experienced, I doubt I would have ever spoken about something so seemingly mystical, so far removed from the pragmatic, mission-focused mindset of military service. What would this involve? I asked. Initially, just consultation, helping us develop appropriate outreach materials, reviewing interview protocols to ensure they're sensitive to military culture. But potentially, if you're interested, a more formal role, We have grant funding for a project coordinator position. I glanced at Sarah, who had been listening quietly beside me. She gave a small nod of encouragement. I'd be interested in learning more. I told Dr. Ahenda, Tinanari Dira Chen. That conversation marked another turning point in my journey. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Dari Wadibasharian and Anmashawun Chen and I spoke regularly, developing a vision for what would eventually become the Combat NDE Project, an initiative dedicated to collecting and analyzing accounts of near-death experiences in combat situations and to supporting veterans who had had such experiences. 6 months later, I was employed full-time as the project's coordinator, working remotely from Virginia but traveling regularly to Dr. Chen's research center in Colorado. The work combined everything that had become important to me: supporting veterans and military families, exploring the implications of near-death experiences, and bringing comfort to those grappling with loss and grief. As we collected more stories from combat veterans who had crossed the threshold of death and returned, patterns began to emerge. Many reported the same core elements I had experienced: the out-of-body perspective, the life review, the encounter with light and unconditional love. But there were also elements that seemed more common in combat NDEs than in civilian accounts. A significant number reported encountering fallen comrades in the transition state, not just sensing their presence as part of the greater light, as I had with Jackson, but actually interacting with them, receiving guidance or reassurance from them. Others described a profound shift in their understanding of the enemies they had fought and sometimes killed, experiencing their adversaries' lives and perspectives during the life review, coming to a deeper understanding of the shared humanity that transcended the artificial boundaries of conflict. And many, like me, returned with a sense of purpose, a mission. Though most had clearer instructions than I had received. Some felt called to work toward peace, others to support their fellow veterans, still others to bridge divides between cultures or religions that they had once seen as irreconcilably opposed. Through it all, I continued to speak to grief support groups, particularly those focused on military losses. My own story evolved as I integrated the insights from other veterans' experiences, as I developed a broader understanding of what these journeys beyond death might mean. And gradually, I began to understand my own message, not through some dramatic revelation, but through the quiet accretion of meaning, through observing the impact my story had on others, through recognizing the patterns in my own evolving path. The message wasn't a single sentence or paragraph I could recite. It was more fundamental than that. It was about connection, the profound, unbreakable connection between all human beings, a connection that transcended death, that persisted beyond the physical realm. It was about the illusory nature of separation, how the divisions we create and fight over in this life appear meaningless when viewed from the perspective of that greater light. For military families grieving loved ones lost to war, this message brought particular comfort. The idea that death was not an ending, that love and connection continued, that their soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines were not truly gone, but transformed. This eased the sharp edges of grief, offered hope in the midst of loss. But there was more to it, something I had only begun to grasp. The experiences of combat veterans who had glimpsed their enemies' lives, who had felt their enemies' emotions and understood their perspectives, pointed toward a more challenging aspect of the message, that the very concept of enemy was a construct of our limited earthly perception. From the perspective of that greater light, there were no enemies, only souls, all equally valuable, all parts of the same whole. This was a difficult truth to communicate, particularly in military circles where the distinction between ally and enemy, friend and foe was foundational. But it was, I became convinced, an essential part of what I had been sent back to share. 3 years after the firefight in Afghanistan, I found myself addressing a room of high-ranking military officers at the Pentagon. Dr. Chen's research had gained enough attention that we had been invited to present our findings on combat NDEs as part of a broader discussion on veteran mental health and spiritual well-being. Looking out at the rows of decorated uniforms, at men and women who had dedicated their lives to military service, who had made decisions that sent young Americans like me into harm's way, I felt the weight of responsibility. What I was about to share would challenge fundamental assumptions, might be dismissed as the ramblings of a traumatized veteran, or, worse, as undermining the moral clarity necessary for military action. But I had committed to delivering my message, whatever the reception. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I began. 3 years ago, I died on a dusty path in Afghanistan. For nearly 4 minutes, my heart did not beat. What I experienced in those minutes changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the nature of human existence. I shared my story as I had many times before, but with a new emphasis on what it might mean for how we understand conflict, how we train and support our troops, how we care for veterans struggling with the psychological and spiritual impacts of combat. The research we've conducted through the Combat NDE project suggests that these experiences are not merely hallucinations or brain chemistry, I explained. They are consistent across cultures, religions, and historical periods. And they point to some provocative conclusions about human consciousness and connection. I paused, gathering courage for what came next. Many combat veterans who have had NDEs report a profound shift in how they view the enemies they once fought. In the life review process, they often experience their actions from the perspective of those they have harmed, including enemy combatants. They return with a deeper understanding of our fundamental interconnectedness, of the artificiality of the boundaries we draw between us and them, friend and foe. I could see discomfort in some faces, thoughtful consideration in others. I want to be clear. I am not suggesting that our military engagements are unnecessary or unjustified. I am not advocating for any particular political position on when or how we deploy our forces. What I am suggesting is that we might better prepare our troops for the psychological and spiritual dimensions of combat if we acknowledge the profound truth that our enemies are, at the most fundamental level, connected to us. One general, silver-haired and stern-faced, raised his hand. With all due respect, Sergeant Cooper, how exactly would you suggest we implement this? Perspective. Should we tell our troops that the Taliban fighter planting an IED is connected to them? That seems like a recipe for hesitation in life or death situations. It was a fair question, one I had anticipated. Sir, I'm not suggesting we change tactical training or rules of engagement. I'm suggesting that in our preparation of troops for deployment, and especially in our support of them after, we create space for a more nuanced understanding of the enemy. Not to weaken resolve, but to strengthen resilience. Many combat veterans struggle with moral injury, the psychological damage from having violated core moral beliefs. Understanding the inherent worth and connection of all human beings doesn't prevent necessary action in combat, but it might help process the aftermath. Another officer spoke up. You mentioned your friend Jackson, was it? You believe you encountered him after death. Many of our troops find comfort in similar beliefs, in the idea that fallen comrades are in heaven or at peace. How is what you're describing different from traditional religious frameworks? The core elements of the near-death experience appear across religious and cultural boundaries. I explained. Christians, Muslims, Hindus, atheists, they report remarkably similar experiences. What this suggests is that whatever lies beyond death transcends our specific religious interpretations, though it doesn't necessarily contradict them. The questions continued, some skeptical, some genuinely curious. Throughout, I tried to balance respect for military culture and priorities with fidelity to what I had experienced and learned. Toward the end of the session, a younger officer, a captain with the bearing of someone who had seen significant combat, asked the question that cut to the heart of the matter. If what you experienced is real, if death isn't the end and we're all connected in the way you describe, what's the point of any of this? He gestured around the room. Why fight? Why sacrifice? Why put young men and women in harm's way if it's all just temporary? It was the question I had asked myself many times since Afghanistan. The answer had been slow in coming, had required integration of my military identity with my new understanding of existence. Just because something is temporary doesn't mean it lacks value, I said after a moment's reflection. In fact, it may be the temporary nature of physical existence that gives it such intensity and meaning. We fight to protect the vulnerable, to preserve freedoms, to create spaces where human potential can flourish, even knowing that all physical things eventually end. I paused, finding the right words. What my experience showed me is not that this life doesn't matter, but that it matters in a different way than I had understood. The connections we form, the love we share, the growth we undergo, these transcend physical death. The sacrifices made by our troops aren't negated by the continuation of consciousness beyond death. They're transformed into something more enduring than I had ever imagined. The captain nodded slowly, seeming to find some satisfaction in this response. As the session concluded, several officers approached me privately, sharing stories of their own brushes with death or of comrades who had reported similar experiences. One brigadier general pulled me aside and told me, in a voice rough with emotion, about his son who had died in Iraq and how my words had given him a new framework for processing that loss. "I'm not saying I'm fully convinced," he admitted, "but I want to be, and that's a start." On the flight home from Washington, I reflected on how far I had come from that day in Afghanistan. The message I had struggled to understand had gradually revealed itself through the work I was doing, through the impact my story had on others, through the integration of my military experience with my glimpse of what lay beyond. The message wasn't simple, wasn't something that could be reduced to a bumper sticker or a soundbite. It was about connection and continuation, about the illusory nature of separation and enmity, about the transformative power of seeing beyond the boundaries of physical existence. And it wasn't a message I could deliver once and be done with. It was a message that needed to be lived, embodied, shared in different contexts and with different audiences. It was work that might take a lifetime, the lifetime I had been given back for this very purpose. Sarah met me at the airport, her smile warming me more than the spring sunshine. She was 5 months pregnant now, our first child growing within her, a daughter we had already decided to name after my mother. "How did it go?" she asked as we walked to the car. "Better than I expected," I said. Some skepticism, of course, but also real interest, real openness. "I think we might actually be making a difference." She squeezed my hand. "You are making a difference. I see it every time you speak to those military families, every time you share your story with veterans struggling to make sense of their own experiences." As we drove home, I rested my hand gently on her rounded belly, feeling the occasional flutter of movement from our daughter. This too was part of my message, part of my purpose. To live fully in this world while holding the awareness of the greater reality I had glimpsed. To create new connections, new love, new life, even while honoring those who had passed beyond. Jackson would never meet his daughter, would never hold her or teach her to fish or throw a football. But what I had experienced in that light gave me the certainty that he wasn't truly absent from her life. The connection remained, transcending the physical separation of death. "I've been thinking," I said to Sarah as we neared our home, a real house now, with a nursery painted in soft yellows and greens, with a yard where our daughter would play, "about expanding the project, not just collecting stories and supporting veterans, but creating a more formal program for military families dealing with loss." "What kind of program?" she asked. "Something that combines the insights from NDEs with practical grief support. A space where people can explore the spiritual dimensions of loss without judgment, where they can share experiences that might sound crazy in other contexts, but make perfect sense in light of what we're learning about consciousness and connection." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You could partner with military chaplains, with VA hospitals." "Exactly. Not replacing existing support systems, but augmenting them. Offering another perspective, another path toward healing." The idea had been forming for months, but speaking it aloud gave it new energy, new clarity. This, too, was part of my evolving message. Creating structures that could carry the insights forward, that could support others in integrating profound spiritual experiences into their lives. As we pulled into our driveway, I found myself thinking of that moment in Afghanistan when I had stood at the threshold of the light, ready to cross over, to join with the greater consciousness that awaited. I had been called back, sent to deliver a message that I had only gradually come to understand. The message was in the comfort I brought to grieving families, in the validation I offered to veterans who had had experiences they couldn't explain, in the bridges I was building between spiritual insight and military culture. But it was also in the life I was living, in my love for Sarah, in our growing family, in each day lived with the awareness of the deeper connections that bound all beings together. I had died in Afghanistan during a firefight. I had left my body and seen my whole life in a flash. And I had returned with a message that I was still delivering, still discovering, still embodying. The journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But now I understood. The message wasn't separate from the messenger. It was being written in the fabric of my life, in each choice, each connection, each moment of presence and purpose. And that understanding, perhaps, was the greatest gift my death had given me.